So, as Natalia mentioned, this second part of the discussion will focus on mobile financial services. So we talk about content design in the first part. And here, this is the other big opportunity, nascent opportunity for smallholders and rural users in general. So we're getting very excited at GSMA and I'm agree about the opportunity really to drive mobile money growth in rural areas. Certainly, this is a big opportunity for operators. What we're seeing is that clearly you have two different trends with mobile money growth. You have certain markets where you've been seeing some traction for some time, but really urban growth is saturated, and the next wave of growth will really come from rural areas. And then you have some markets where maybe mobile money is not as advanced, and the opportunity there really for someone who's addressing this opportunity is the rural expansion opportunities to see what you can do in agriculture and agricultural value chains with mobile money. It's not just about replicating what's been working in urban areas. This is very clear. You need to understand as an operator what works in agricultural value chains, how you can digitize payments in agricultural value chains. So this is something that we're trying to discuss today, and we're also trying to continue the discussion on user-centric design and how you answer that question, how you understand the users, the demand, and then how you design financial products around the need of the rural users. At the GSMA with Amagri, we've been doing some work recently in the past few months on agri-MFS. We have a very in-depth case study report about insurance. That's one of the few studies on this, and I invite you to look at that. It's about Acre, this mobile microinsurance product for by Syngenta Foundation in Sub-Saharan Africa. We'll also be doing some work with Airtel Malawi currently about value chain mapping in Malawi and understanding value chains there in that market. And of course, we're increasing our focus and collaboration and cooperation with mobile money for the Mbank, our team at the GSMA. So today we're going to have with us Max William Mattern from CGAP. We have Laura Crow from Vodafone Group and Francie Matseketsa from Airtel Malawi. We're going to start with an introduction. They're going to tell us what they've been up to recently, starting with Max, who's going to tell us about some research that you've been conducting about end user and financial needs of the smallholder families. So we start with that, and then we'll move into a discussion.
My name is Max Mattern, and I work with CGAP. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with us, we're an independently funded research think tank that's housed at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. And so I'm part of the Financial Innovation for Smallholder Families team. And so our team has actually has a 5-year strategy and a dual mandate. And so the first part of that mandate is to develop an evidence base around smallholder demand. And so what we really believe is that while there's a lot of solutions that people have proposed out there, these aren't necessarily based on a fundamental understanding of what smallholder families really need and want. And when I refer to smallholder families, I'm really talking about smallholder families as a whole. So that means both their agricultural and non-agricultural incomes and expenditures. Now we have 3 projects currently underway to this end. The first are the Smallholder Financial Diaries, which are led by my colleague Jamie Anderson, and which we actually recently wrapped up. We followed about 90 households in 3 countries for an entire year, tracking every single one of their financial transactions. And we have some very rich data that came out on really what the financial lives of smallholders are really like. And I'll speak about a few of those preliminary findings in a second. We're also launching several national smallholder household surveys in Pakistan, Mozambique, Tanzania, and also in 2 other countries, which will be determined soon. We also, in the project that I've been leading, have been 4 what we call applied product innovation projects, which actually are user-centered or human-centered design. So we've been working with providers in Rwanda, Zimbabwe, in Senegal, and in Cambodia on how we can design digital financial services that respond better to the needs and aspirations of smallholder families. So what have we been learning so far from our efforts to build this evidence base? Well, first, there are really big barriers to use of financial services among smallholder families. And this really comes down to capabilities. We've touched on the fact that illiteracy is a big problem, but also just basic digital literacy in general. You may be able to, I mean, I don't know who here has an older parent, but have you ever tried to get them to use a new app or a new service on a smartphone? Sure, they're literate, but I mean, they don't really necessarily understand it the way that, say, a 15-year-old does. I mean, even me, I don't necessarily understand it as well as a 15-year-old does. So, the second is that we're really asking, we think about, oh, well, digital is a substitute for cash. But what we're really asking a lot of smallholders to do is make a double jump from tangible assets that they're using to save, for example, livestock, jewelry, to a completely, you know, this in the cloud digital stores of value. And that's really a challenge that I don't think that we think about enough. And then finally, we have to think about how can we take a staged approach to introducing mobile financial services or digital financial services. And as some of my colleagues here had spoke about before, information services, so AgriVas, that can be a big entry point, but also non-agricultural needs. For example, services that relate to education, school fee payments, for example. These provide some very solid value propositions for smallholders, and that can be maybe the first step. Now, what are the findings that we've had from our financial diaries in Pakistan, Mozambique, and Tanzania? I've put up here. You can see that we already know that smallholders have various income sources, right? And that's reflected here. In fact, the number of income sources is actually higher. Non-agricultural income sources is actually higher, but also the value. And then finally, if you look at the very end, the last category there, that includes in-kind consumption. And what we don't think about is that smallholders are a really diverse group. You know, you would never say that, you know, all Europeans are exactly the same, or all Americans are exactly the same, or all Africans are exactly the same. Well, smallholders, there are between 1.5 and 2.5 billion smallholders in the world. So we can't just talk about them as if they have the exact same needs. And what you can see here is across these three countries, they're very, very different profiles. And the importance of agriculture is quite different depending on who you're talking about. So segmentation and understanding what smallholders need is very important. And what you can see is in a country like Mozambique, we're talking about 49%, or even in Pakistan, 53% of their agricultural revenue is actually in kind. So a lot of times they're actually consuming most of what they're eating. So what does that mean for financial services, especially value chain finance? If they're not really selling it, how can we really think of a solution like value chain finance as being the solution for all smallholders? We need to look beyond just, first of all, credit solutions. We need to look beyond that. Going to digital, what are we finding in the smallholder diaries? Well, what we're finding is, well, there may be awareness and usage even of mobile phones. Mobile money and mobile financial services have a long way to go. And this goes back to what I was talking about literacy, capability, unfamiliarity, and just be generally uncomfortable with digital. So we talk about it as if it's the panacea solution, but we really need to address this giant gap here. I mean, even in a country like Pakistan that has a pretty developed digital ecosystem, the gap between actually using a mobile phone, hearing about mobile money, and then actually using mobile money is huge. And then you look at Mozambique. So we're also working with providers, and we're using human-centered design to actually try to translate this evidence into action. And so we've actually been working with 4 providers: Amret Microfinance Institution in Cambodia, UOB in Rwanda, Econet in Zimbabwe, and MyAgro, an input retailer in Senegal. And what we've learned, and actually we're going to be releasing a publication at the end of the month that goes over some of the insights and learnings from these 4 projects. But something I found particularly fascinating were these 3 core design principles. If you want to design mobile financial services, they should be flexible, so minimize the perceived risk of using these financial services. They should be familiar. Try to replicate already behaviors that you already are observing among these populations. And they should be tangible. Again, I go back to this double jump from in-kind to digital. We need to make these things feel real to smallholders, otherwise they're not going to adopt them and they're not going to use them. So thank you very much. I look forward to talking about this a bit more.
Hi everybody. So I sit within the M-Pesa team. So we kind of automatically obviously made some assumptions about the role of finance what it can do in terms of agriculture. So we kind of started work, I think, as a group, doing lots of work on agriculture for a number of years. And we had a hypothesis that financial services was the right place to house some of the product development to be looked at. And part of that was because we felt that payments is a rail, it's an infrastructure, and there should be more services that built around that infrastructure. Second of all, we felt that financial services has started some behavior change because it's such a difficult product to grasp. It started to be embedded in some people's lives. Not all customers' lives, but we started that journey, so we know it's the stickiness for people to start using products and services. And lastly, we just thought it enriched the portfolio of services we could bring to our customer base. And we've heard time and time again, it's a very big segment, so you can't just have one product out there, you need a portfolio of products and services. So I'm only going to talk about 2 services today, and they are quite specific. So they are kind of tailored to different segments. And in addition to that, I can also really put hand on heart, I don't think they fully followed the full human-centered design process. I think we've also helped avoid some of the cliches that we also talked about in terms of groups and headquarters and thinking we know best. So I'm pleased to say we avoided some of those cliches, but I don't think we've followed every single principle laid out. But we're in a journey, and I think we're already aware and iterating. So it started with the Connected Farmer Alliance, as we talked today. We've got one of our partners in the room from Technoserve. So it was a partnership between Vodafone, Technoserve, and USAID to look at the wider ecosystem of agriculture and financial services. So Technoserve were really brought on as the institution or body that could help bridge some of our knowledge gap and also do some of that work to work with the farmers and understand some of the insights, do the value chain mapping that was mentioned earlier about understanding what's happening in each industry and bring some of those insights to the table. We also decided to work with a vendor that was in-house, so it goes back to some of the discussions. So we've had our own software company within Vodafone that was also part of that whole process. So that kind of gave us advantage that they were learning with us on this journey. Also, we have a slightly longer term horizon, so as we can try and develop these products. So now we call it Connected Farmer. We're trying to get into commercialization stage. So the product is aimed at businesses. So it's an enterprise-based product, so enterprise agribusinesses that want to transact with more smallholder farmers in their value chain. So it's quite a niche. If you look at what smallholders look like, that's actually quite a niche product in terms of numbers. But we thought it was a place to start. So the product itself enables businesses to first register farmers in their supply chain so that there's electronic records of them. And once they're starting to collect information about those farmers in their own value chain, start to then segment the own content that they want to push out to farmers. So, and that's bi-directional. So they can send information to their farmers, they can collect the information back. Also enables them to distribute payments. They can buy produce when they come to collect it. They can provide advances if those agribusinesses is providing finance. They can use this as a platform to provide those advances. They issue receipts to the farmers on delivery, so farmers have the transparency of what they're getting, and also the business is starting to get some data. So that's the first product, just brushed. And then quickly for Empower, and maybe we'll talk about this more as we get into the panel session. So Empower is a savings and loans product. It was quite a copycat from Mshwari, also a savings and loan product in Kenya. Didn't see the same kind of full rapid takeoff, so they went back to the drawing board, started to do some research in terms of why it wasn't taking off, started to bring some of the insights around, particularly marketing, that actually some of our marketing for these products is not as good as people think that M&Os can do on this kind of marketing. And then they started to involve partners on a rural education campaign, so we can start to talk about that as well, and had good results in terms of actually starting an education at the forefront about what financial services is. So I know I'm out of time, so I'll pause there and then we can have lots of debate.
So we've had this introduction from Max about the end user research that they're doing. Laura has presented some products that are already out there in the market and seeing some traction. Now we have Francis Matseketsa from Airtel Malawi, who's going to tell us about their plans to penetrate the rural market.
Thank you, Daniel. Hello, everybody. Maybe let me start by saying in mobile financial service or mobile money, if you want to see the impact of this animal, let the system just go down for 5 minutes. And you realize the impact of this very innovative animal, so to speak. So in Malawi, I think very quickly, there is a breeding ground for innovation in Malawi as far as mobile financial service is concerned. And also, you're looking at 85% of the population in Malawi living in the remote rural areas. And of the rural population, up more than 3 million of them. Just to show the effect of the breeding ground in Malawi, that Malawi is so rich in good soils, it's so rich in cash crops that the farming community can do. So looking at the demographics here, 30% of the GDP comes from smallholder farmers because of the natural good soils. You're looking at the demand for information for agriculture. And so yet there are limited extension services who can also provide expertise for the farmers. And you're looking at 73% of the adult population are unbanked, and 80% of the workforce are either in plantations, tea and sugar plantations, or they are occupying themselves on the farming activities. So as a strategy, while we are running the mobile financial service, we found that this is a key for us also to penetrate those rural areas. But penetrating them, like the earlier speakers have said, just without having any knowledge of how they are living out there in the farming communities becomes a key challenge. So basically, we had to go through a process, and it starts with identifying who these key players are. We're speaking of the extension officers, we're speaking of lead farmers, we're speaking of the rural agents for the mobile financial service, we're speaking of village saving schemes that are there, particularly the women groups that sit together and exchange cash from the farming communities and try to save. We're speaking now of us, Airtel Malawi, having actually found the need to follow this toolkit that was articulated by Frog. And we found it very useful and handy. But before we actually followed it through, where we had to actually create dedicated resources for that. Full-fledged product manager, user expert who actually coordinate partnerships from a global and a local partnership perspective, so that in the process of following that design toolkit, it actually goes a long way in complementing and making sure that we actually arrive at a service blueprint with a clear value proposition for both the unbanked masses and for the rural smallholder farmers. Now, the current mobile financial service in Malawi, Airtel Money, is fully fledged, vibrant now, as we talk, with the thousands of agents in the rural areas who provide cash-in, cash-out services. But in the farming communities, you also see that we are working hard to come up with what we call extended services. That's the agri services, which we are calling Nchikumbe, and the micro loans and micro savings schemes, which is we are awaiting regulatory approval as we speak. We have done all the go-to-market plans. Now, you're looking at the mobile banking aspect where we've connected with the banks. and we're looking at other features that are actually, useful for the entire value chain. The agro dealers are able to use all of these as well. So this is just to demonstrate that we have a vibrant mobile financial service that is also consistent with the situation on the ground, but we need to take more deeply into the whole value chain. Now, the ecosystem service offering that we are trying to make sure that it becomes relevant, we create accessibility, we create a kind of a financial management system for the value chain for the users. And there are loyalty programs that I may also unpack a little bit during our panel session. We also are very responsive in terms of what we intend to really provide to the stakeholders in this value chain. So we want to convert this farmer to actually operate more cost effectively, and while they are in that proximity of doing their agricultural activities, they are able to do their farm management in a cost effective manner. Otherwise, using the user-centric design, going into the farming communities, specific designated areas, what did we find? We find issues relating to pricing versus the seasonal income aspects, and how we then address it in line with the expectations from the farmers. We also looked at the issue of simplicity of the product. We also realized that these smallholder communities, they also require the information. And how do we make sure that this information is provided? Now, as we talk, we are in a soft launch phase with the MAGRI service, and the response that is just coming already without doing a commercial launch is just overwhelming. So we'll take a little bit more. Thank you.
So I wanted to go back to the points you, Max, made initially, and I wanted to ask you, Laura and Francis, to comment on that. About this is very interesting research that you're conducting and CGAP is conducting at the moment to really understand the financial needs of the smallholder farmers. And there were two aspects that I think are especially interesting. One is that the agricultural payments is not just about agriculture, but it's about the ecosystem. You need to understand how you digitize these transactions, and you enable really to serve the whole rural household. And you Max mentioned about school fees, health. So one question for Laura, starting with this. What is your experience? Can you elaborate on your experience starting in Kenya, and maybe as well in the new markets where you're looking to extend services such as just CFA, in order to provide for the smallholder households in terms of financial services and payments beyond the use cases more related to agriculture specifically?
I think for us in terms of our strategy for agricultural services, if it's a strategy, a luxury, or a happy accident, but we've focused on markets where we are very developed from a mobile money system. So that means that we do have that ecosystem there already, and that's been an important precondition for us. So we took the examples of school payments. So in Tanzania, the school payment service is already there, and that's important for us to know that then if we're loading people's wallets with the value of cash on their account, what can they then go on and do with that money once it's in their account? Now, of course, those customers are new to mobile money, they're first going to withdraw it into cash because they need to trust the system. So A, we need to know they're going to do that and prepare for the liquidity of that. But B, once they start to trust it, there needs to be use cases that are relevant to that customer. So we would always push the products and services once we're in the same strategy of building up that ecosystem. But as I say, I think I'm not sure if it's strategy or happy accident, but that's our approach.
And in your case, Francis, again, the ecosystem is the key word. So you want to digitize these transactions in rural areas. push the money into the rural areas, but then you need to create those services whereby the electronic cash stays in the system, and then you have a whole set of relevant services for your rural customers. So what is your thinking in terms of enabling those additions?
Yeah, basically, right now you find that the system from a mobile financial service point of view, we've got features that already can be utilized and capitalized. However, it's very necessary that we have started to make sure that the rural agents will deliberately now acquire and go to talk to the agro dealers, understand their cash cycles, and ensure that how can they use our features such as the merchant payment, how can they receive also from the farmers when they are looking for inputs, with fertilizer, seeds, and are they ready to accept mobile money as the means of payment? So to us, players like the agro dealers are critical in this value chain, because already we almost close to 50 of them who are now interested, and because above them there are companies like the seed companies. We have seen the value proposition of ensuring that at least the issues around cash, it poses a lot of security issues, and also costs associated with moving around with cash, CIT costs. So it starts from that perspective of acceptance of the mobile money as a means of payment. And now, going into the farming communities, the farmer, in our case now, Airtel money is there as a mobile financial service. Now the farmer, when they dial the IVR and get information relating to agricultural services, the next thing is they want to transact. If they are on mobile money, they are able now to identify the agro dealers within the proximity and make cost-effective decisions of accessing inputs, and then even making payments to those particular agri-businesses, depending on whether they are agro-processors, agro-dealers, seed suppliers, and so on. So we're creating that ecosystem from that perspective, following through the transactions. It's not easy though. Maybe we are taking the challenges in some way, but that's what we are trying to do now, and we are seeing a few now coming to understand this, though it's a process. Yeah. So basically that's how mobile financial service, the mobile money, Airtel money, is actually trying to come in and saying, how do we make it easy for you farmer? Now within your proximity, within your farming communities. Because farmers in Malawi are like clustered in certain communities. They are not like spread across in such a way. They are like in groups, radius of say about 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers. So they know each other, they know where to get the inputs, but they have to find it easy to do it from the mobile phone, everything, then they complete the transactions.
So that's the first step, essentially. You need to figure out and take that opportunity how to digitize those payments and those transactions with the other businesses, and then gain more support on the system. One question that I was very interested in, you mentioned it very briefly in your presentation about savings. So one of the findings that you have in your research is how, and that challenges some of the assumptions that we have really about mobile financial services for rural users. So the assumption is that credit is the number one need, and certainly credit is very important. But there are also different ways to get credit, right? So it's not just about electronic cash or cash in fact, there's other ways. So I just wanted to expand a bit more on that. What are your findings in terms of the importance of saving and the potential for saving products?
Sure. Well, from what we found, I mean, first of all, going back to the segmentation of smallholder households, I would say that there are broadly three sort of categories or segments of smallholders. Those who are really tightly connected to value chains, and this represents really the smallest group of smallholders, those who have actually formal contracts with buyers. Then you have those who are only loosely connected to value chains, meaning they may sell in a local market, but they don't have, let's say, a formal buyer that they can guarantee that will be buying from them. And then you have the non-commercial or subsistence smallholders, right? And for this group, going back to some of the findings from the diaries research, in Mozambique, you had only, when you looked at the agricultural cash incomes of smallholders, only 7% of their total cash incomes come from agriculture. But then when you include in-kind consumption, so what they're actually consuming themselves, that agricultural income jumps to over 50%. So the massive majority of what these smallholders are actually producing is for their own consumption. So in that case, if you don't have, say, title to your land, if you don't have any sort of unmovable assets that you can use as collateral, how are you supposed to really extend credit without any sort of credit history or scoring bureaus or anything like that? So then you have to look at what are the alternative financing mechanisms that are available. And one of the things that we found, especially in our human-centered design projects, was that smallholders really struggle to plan ahead for the future. In Senegal, they would say that they eat their money, right? Because before they can get from where they get a cash inflow to the point where, say, they would maybe save it under the mattress, there are thousands of different things that they need to spend that money on. Education, food. There's really just, at the end of the day, not much left over to save. So how can we build safe products, especially digital products, mobile products, that help them to actually save, and in some cases, have the discipline to keep that money set aside for when they will need it. So whether that's for inputs, whether that's for school fees, savings can really be a very powerful tool for smallholders. But that's not to discount the importance of credit. And in a way, savings can be in itself a stepping stone to credit. Because and especially with digital, and this is the power of digital products, you can actually track those savings. And you get an idea of their financial discipline. And that in itself can be, when combined with, say, the data from mobile networks like airtime purchases, et cetera, that can provide in itself its own sort of credit scoring mechanism that will allow them to get instant unsecured microloans in the future.
Allora, what is your take about credit and saving products and your experience in East Africa?
Yeah, so I completely agree with what everyone said. Some different segments will need different products. So credit will be relevant for some farmers. For some, it will just cause an over-indebtedness issue, and some actually already have access through existing means and have less of a need. And I think credit and savings do often go together. Say savings can help you build collateral or records to access credit. I think I'm going to probably go on a limb here. I think if there are more disruptive needs that are going to be credit in the first place to start assessing savings, encourage savings off the back of that credit. So it might not be a huge credit access, but just getting them started with some credit tools and helping them save and manage that credit responsibly, as long as you're not over-indebted them. You can also encourage a savings behavior. So I think they go hand in hand, but they will always differ to the segment you're going after.
And then you also have insurance, which is the other part of the derivative financial services, which is actually something that can become an enabler for credit as well, for the smallholder products that work with value chains, with full formal value chains. So consumer insurance that can be also collateral can enable a saving, a credit product as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think we had a big debate around insurance the other day. Insurance I find harder to get my head around because I find in the same bucket of credit and savings they're all risk mitigating tools or opportunity tools, and sometimes you see them as three separate entities, whereas to me, why is insurance taken so separately to savings and mitigation tools? So I would probably think what the problem is we're trying to solve, and then look at the range of instruments rather than just think about the insurance product.
Okay, let me ask you, we're talking about designing services and user-centric design, of course. But when we look at mobile financial services, so the user is the smallholder, of course, but also the enterprise, the agribusinesses that we work with. So I wanted to ask your opinion, Max, about what is the value of design for agribusinesses? How do you design around agribusinesses? And also for you, Laura, and Francis, if you want to comment. Your experience specifically with CFA, you have this solution that can be configured depending on the needs of the enterprise. enterprise customer. But I wanted to ask you how you go on about that process of adapting your tool to different agribusinesses.
I'll just quickly
Yeah.
add something, and then I think Laura is actually much more qualified to speak to this. I think that when we talk about user-centered design or human-centered design, we always just think about the end user as the person we're designing for. But in reality, there are so many different stakeholders and players in these ecosystems. I mean, you mentioned agribusinesses, but also agents, agri-dealers, et cetera, all the way down the line. I mean, we need to be designing products that work for every single actor within that chain. And so I think that we sometimes might lose sight of that, and of course it's important to focus on the end user, but we need to design products that work for everyone, including the providers. I mean, the business case is really important too. I mean, we can't forget that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd also invite Mike to chip into this. But we focus on product looking at the needs of the enterprise users and then the farmers that they were contracting with to try and see the sweet spot between those two priorities and focus on those as the functionalities we have in the platform that we were taking to market. I would say in terms of like enterprise users, and some of the things that we found in challenges sometimes are not knowing what technology is available to them to utilize, and so there's been an education campaign also with the enterprise users in terms of this functionality. And then lastly to your point around the flexibility of design, what we've tried to do over a long-term approach with our vendor that we're working with is develop a platform that under the use cases we've prioritized, we think is kind of 70-80% there, but then is a very configurable platform. So then we go to businesses and they have a different process flow or mapping or a different role, we can accommodate that within the platform. We've done it that way because we recognize you need to have flexibility, but on the business side, if you're doing bespoke for every customer, that just isn't cost efficient. You're not going to make your margins. So we hope that that is going to be a process that works, but we still, have challenges on that side because that configuration still takes time and it's still a long enterprise sale. So we still also need support in terms of innovating around that sales and marketing process.
Yeah, I think a comment from me would be, to me, this is an exciting process. From what happened in Malawi, I think it starts with ensuring that there is a committed team. Commitment from that perspective, from a planning, I think earlier speakers mentioned something along these lines to say what we went through was to make sure that there is a lot of planning around this, knowing very well what the ultimate strategic objectives are in terms of the strategy you want to follow. In as much as there are two-pronged objectives relating to this whole user-centric design, to satisfy customer experience, and obviously the bottom line of the company comes also along that. So lots of office planning, lots of teamwork, lots of cross-functional teams involving all the key departments or sections, and lots of collaboration amongst they, like in our case, working very closely with the GSMA as the global partner, and the local partners, institutions, non-governmental organizations responsible for the entire content, whilst our mobile money team, which is a fully fledged unit, actually is looking at this from a mobile commerce point of view and looking at the KPIs for mobile financial services from a revenue earning customer, but whilst at the same time we are looking at these poor farmers who are in the rural areas and maybe not so rich, but a bit on the suffering side financially. So I think you want to really look at this whole thing and say, when we are planning, now there is a lot of going back and forth in terms of now engaging the actual farmers. Which teams go in the field, and for what reason? What do we need to really, eventually come up with that satisfies the customer needs, that takes away the pain points, whilst at the same time fulfilling the objectives of the rural penetration strategy in our case. So, so going through these validation processes, ensuring that we are designing a product where the farmer is able, like in Malawi, literacy levels are very low. And you're looking at these guys, if you speak your good English or whatever language, they will not understand. The earlier speakers, Lydian spoke about the trust issues. So you involve even the lead farmers, the IEDOs, you involve those faces that they are familiar with. So it's a whole lot of a process, which may take me a bit of time to articulate. But I think, in summary, what it brings is you have to get closer to these farmers. You have to understand them and actually go back and come back and show them, is this what you meant? Is this what you meant? If it means that. So that, eventually you come up with something that, you are assured. I spoke earlier on that we are in a soft launch phase. I waited to do a commercial phase launch end of this month. Just the 1 week of showing them that there is this animal where you can actually go and check and hear what you want to hear about planting, growing maize, groundnuts, sorghum, rice. The response is just overwhelming before we even do the commercial. So it only goes to show that this tool called user-centric design is a powerful tool. That's the few comments I have.
Okay. So briefly, I think one question that it's good to ask here is also about the business case, right, for Agri-MFS now. So we're talking about the importance to offer these payments, financial solutions, and the opportunity, of course, to bundle with content services, to really enrich the value proposition. But then from an MNO point of view, Francis, you mentioned your perspective of adding value in improving your KPIs, right? For especially in a country like Malawi, where the rural sector is so prominent, by increasing your penetration in rural areas. But how do you justify internally the case for Agri-MFS, right? Is it more about softer business benefits, indirect business benefits? You have to look at the contribution that Agri-MFS brings to your whole business, to core network services, or as I seem to understand in your case, you're actually trying to improve immediately from day one potentially, or in a few months, your mobile money KPI. Maybe we can start with Laura.
Sure. So I think from our side, there's a range of different revenue streams we see from it, and I don't think there'll be one in its isolation that's going to drive the full take-up internally from a business case perspective, because it's a really hard area to make money from. So for us, I mean, it's a range of things like differentiating yourself in the minds of the customer. He talks about mind share, so it's all around that extra ARPU and reduction in churn. So there's that element. From a mobile money perspective, it's like, how do you convert cash to e-value? So there's a lot of cash in the agricultural space where we can then put that into e-value, which is then a multiplier effect for us. So we earn revenue of all the incremental transactions that happen from person to person, paying the school fees. Admittedly, in some markets, that's lower than others because that kind of transition from in-kind to cash hasn't happened yet. So that case will differ from country to country. And then there is a new revenue stream in terms of where we see with Connected Farm in terms of the enterprise itself. So we're trying to drive efficiency, cost cutting, helping those businesses source from stable supply. And that's commercial benefits for those businesses. So we're trying to extract that value from business as well. And often those businesses are enterprise clients of Vodafone. So it really goes back to the circle again of mind share amongst your customers, of your enterprise customers, and the stickiness and the additional benefits you can bring from your enterprise clients. So it's really hard to put it on kind of one KPI, but we actually have quite good senior level buy-in that it comes from a range of different areas.
Okay. Max, can you comment on that as well? I mean, how would you advise a mobile operator to deal with this opportunity?
Yeah. I mean, I think that Laura made a lot of very good points, and I think that covers pretty well the business cases for Agri-MFS. But I think that one of the things that we need to realize is that in a lot of these markets, this is the majority of the population. And over time, already you see sort of, mobile growth is sort of slowing, right? Because we're saturating urban markets. So we've already picked the low-hanging fruit. Now, how are you going to drive further expansion? It's going to be smallholders. I mean, in some markets, it's 60% or more of the population. So if you really want to grow as an MNO, I mean, you just can't ignore this market. I mean, that would be the fundamental business case that I would make.
Yeah, very quickly, it's in line with what Max and Laura said, but you're looking at the pricing model, which actually creates a sustainable means and it's affordable, but the whole idea and strategy is to eventually create some loyalty also, because mobile financial service for the operator creates retention and it reduces churn. In this MRC, you are going in there to penetrate so that these farmers, these smallholder farmers, they are the majority, like Max has said. And you want to tap into them in saying, we are available for you for this, and get this information via your mobile phone. At the same time, there is a way of capturing them for the future revenue that you want to create. So in a way, there is the pricing on the IVR and there is SMS, they're using the USSD and all that. But at the same time, when they come on mobile money, the moment they are now bringing money on the wallet as a future, future important strategy, they will create revenue for you, sustainable for the future years.
So questions from the room? We have a couple there.
Thanks. So my name's David Chow-Jones. I'm not an agriculture person, but I'm a water person. So Max, I wanted to question one of your things about growth, and I absolutely want to drive Francis to the airport because we're about to start working in Malawi. So free lift to the airport, Francis. That's your takeaway. But so we work in water, and you're saying it's saturated urban market. But the project we're doing in Malawi, it's in fact two. One is looking at people in formal housing who are paying a monthly water bill, every single month for a significant amount. But then also in the low-income areas where you can reach up to 5% of people's income. And again, they're paying daily. So I'm wondering how much mobile money is really tapping in, particularly that second one, but also the first one of utility payments. And if that's not actually a growth market for the MNOs, as much as the smallholders are. Furthermore, you don't have to reach out to lots of smallholders and lots of middle people. You've got to deal with one water utility, and that's delivering several million customers. So that's my question to you. And Francis, do you want the lift to the airport?
Do you want the lift? No, you're completely right, and maybe I should also rephrase what I was saying in the sense that when it comes to mobile money, I would not at all say that urban markets are saturated, especially as you reach down to the bottom of the pyramid in these markets. And you're completely right with what you're saying in terms of dealing with the utility. Is going to be maybe a more efficient way of sort of reaching these clients. And they're not right now, right? So they're not, mobile money isn't reaching these clients. So I wouldn't say that at all. I guess my bigger point would be that in terms of mobile usage, and going to Francis's point, in terms of winning the loyalty of these customers, if you can meet a need of smallholders in rural areas, and it may not just be mobile money. I tend to think of digital financial services, and even mobile financial services being a bit broader than even just mobile money by itself. But I would argue that if you can find financial solutions that actually address a need or an aspiration of this client segment, you can drive growth of mobile services just more generally. And I agree with you completely.
Okay. And by the way, obviously the opportunity with utilities is big, but here we were trying to address how you can actually focus more on the smallholder farmers. So it's not exclusive, it's not one opportunity versus the other, but really how you can provide for the financial services of the smallholders, of course, and growth, as you're saying. I think at model saturation, we're talking about decreasing growth, really.
Right, yeah, exactly.
That's the challenge. There's another question there?
My name is Taongan from Malawi, and I'm working on the MRC project under the leadership of Francis over there. So my question is for Max. and thank you so much for all the details that you shared over there. I found that quite interesting. I'm the UX lead, so responsible for the user testings in the field. And one of the things I was grappling with is trying to understand rural finance, like how the cash flows in the rural community. Or if we're talking about all these products, where's the money coming from? And do they have money all the year round? Is their money seasonal? So how do we tap into the money, or how do we convince them to go digital? So my question for you is, what do you think is going to be the driving factor for this transition? I also like your comment where you're saying we're not just looking at the end user, we're looking at his ecosystem. So if we're digitizing his world, I'm thinking we're digitizing his ecosystem, we really need to understand what's going on. For instance, in the Malawi scenario, we're telling them that we're giving them a product that's really going to be very cheap, but our description of cheap is not the description of cheap. What do you think is, oh, I'm just going to give you a 15 kwacha, which is really little minute to us, but the farmer comes back to us and says, I don't have money all year round, I don't have to pay you per call, I can pay you per month. Yeah, so like a one-off per month. So this kind of transition, like most of the people we deal with in Malawi, they're unbanked, they live in the rural areas. And one of the things in trying to convince them, the trust cycle she was talking about, in terms of trust, is a big issue. I can even have a mobile bank in the rural area, but I'm not going to keep the money there because I'm not really sure my hard-earned money is going to be there next time I go there, so I'll keep it in the house. So that kind of transition, what do you think is really going to drive all this transition? I've got my money in kind, I've got my money in cash, and the digital, the virtual world is a strange thing to me. What is the transition going to be like? Thank you.
No, it's a great question, and you know, if I had the magical question or magical answer, I'm sure that I'd be making a lot more money than I am now. But to your point, first, I'd like to shamelessly plug a couple of our publications that cover some of this. In January, so I mentioned the Smallholder Financial Diaries. My colleague will be releasing those results in January, and that'll provide a lot of really good insights into household cash flows among smallholders. Secondly, at the end of this month, I'll be releasing a publication on insights into how to design digital financial services for smallholders, and that really addresses some of these points of how do you bridge this transition, right, between what smallholders, mostly informal financial products and services that smallholders are using now, and these digital products. And I think that trust, I mean, that you touched on, is, if not the biggest, one of the biggest problems. And we were working in Zimbabwe, and I know we have a colleague from Net1 back there. We were working in Zimbabwe, and you know, their recent experience with hyperinflation and dollarization, a lot of people lost all of their savings, right, that they had in banks. Mistrust of formal finance.
One of them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Zimbabwe also. And you can imagine, I mean, even for non-smallholders, how are you going to trust a bank after that? But for smallholders, especially who maybe did not even have any margin to lose, this is just a major catastrophe. How do you rebuild that trust? And I think that even beyond just financial services, you need to do. I mean, this is something where marketing, products that really. One of the things that we found in some of our CGAP's past human-centered design work was that low-income populations in general, not just smallholders, feel like financial services aren't for them, right? A lot of times you'll see advertisements for banking services and it'll have people who look very wealthy, very successful, and they think, oh gee, this just isn't for me. So how can we sort of rethink the way that we market these services so that it's not only for that top 1%, but also for all of the people in the country. And a lot of times it's just a matter of telling their stories, talking to them in language that they understand. And one of the funniest thing, I was in Zimbabwe, and we were actually prototyping a marketing campaign for smallholders. And we had a poster prototype that we showed them. And it was just pictures of farmers that were in a neighboring village that we took, and we made a poster out of it. And they said, hang on, that person looks like me. That looks like my neighbor. And the impact of that, it's so small, but the impact of that is huge. So I think that there are many different strategies, but trust, that's a huge point, and we can't forget about that.
I'd just like to add to that. I think every MNO put their hands up in the room. How many times have you had that discussion with your marketing department when they do the poster and you say this isn't representative, and then they say, No, it's aspirational. They want aspirational. That's what they want. And you're like, really?
Good point. I think we have time for one more question.
From Ross Malware, a question for Laura and probably Francis. You built the Connected Farmer Network Alliance on top of the success of M-Pesa, and now you're doing all these use cases and how you can use this network or this system to meet the needs of agricultural systems. If you go back in time, when you first introduced this program like M-Pesa or mobile money into a rural setting, with the end in mind, if we want to have this ecosystem for, we can build all these agricultural services on top of that. What's the key things you would have done differently? Or what are the key things to do to get to that point as quickly as possible?
Distribution. Make sure you get your rural distribution right. And we're still doing that. So even in our advanced markets, but make sure you invest in good quality agents, you train them, you look at cash liquidity issues, it's all around the face of that service out in rural areas.
Okay, Francis, you want to talk on this?
Yes, my quick comment to that is I would have made sure, because the word ecosystem, that's to me where the difficulty is. To actually ensure that you create, inculcate a culture of accepting people in those communities, on top of the distribution, but the merchant network in those rural areas, for rural shops that are selling various commodities, they have to adopt and accept the mobile wallet as a means of payment to start with. Then that will address everything else.
Okay, so before we finish, I'm not going to ask you to think about tweets or things like that. I've seen that happen in I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wanted to ask each of you to think about a call for action for the mobile industry, right? If we look at this opportunity moving forward. And the reason why I wanted to ask you about this is because sometimes, again, it's challenging assumptions. We always think about the opportunity to digitize payments and financial transactions, and obviously mobile money as the rail for that. But often you come across many discussions where the mobile operator is not mentioned or is peripheral to discussion even. So I guess for the mobile industry, the question is how can MNOs lead this process, and how can we have services that are MNO-led? So starting from Francis, what do you think the industry needs to do in order to achieve this?
I think first the quick thing to do is to ensure that in a country, whether there are 2 or 3 mobile operators, they have to come together on the table. If they are not at the same level of innovation, they must have one common agenda of creating scale and engage and partner the various stakeholders, the retailer, the whole distribution channel, so that they know that there is one message coming from the operators, so that there is interoperability between the operators. Interoperability, I think, becomes key to drive this, and then the entire value chain will follow such.
Sharing agents as well as interoperability of payments,
yes,
everything that enables that.
I would say that the number one, maybe not, one of the most important things that MNOs should be thinking about investing in is their agent networks, actually. Especially when you're talking about smallholders who may lack familiarity with these types of tools. This is probably the most important asset that MNOs have. And having that agent infrastructure and agents who can add that human touch point into the digital experience is so key, especially early on in the adoption cycle. We need to help ease people into use of mobile. And really, I don't know of any other, any market where the agent network, where any other type of organization has as strong of an agent network as an MNO. And I think MNOs should really leverage that to bring smallholders into the digital age.
Yeah. I'd echo that, but to say something slightly different, I'll actually echo Natalia's point from earlier that MNOs have to get out of the mindset of outsourcing everything and taking loads of value from the outsourcing. And if you're going to actually take genuine value from what you design and give that back from the customers, then you need to know the product cycle from the beginning to the end. I mean, we haven't discussed much about the end today, but I'm really passionate about that as much as the beginning. And that doesn't mean you have to do everything. You have to know about everything that's happening in that process in order to have an influence, in order to help innovate and help bring on the right path. So I would say get out the outsourcing model and stop trying to be lazy and just go and do it.
Okay.